Hi. I hope you enjoyed tonight's performance of Much Ado About Nothing in a modern verse translation by Ranjit Bold. And if you had to pause it to hear President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris addressing the nation tonight, I truly hope that you'll come back and finish watching the show at your convenience. I'm Julia Listengarten, Artistic Director of Theater UCF, and I will moderate tonight's Talkback. It is my great pleasure to introduce our panel for tonight's Talkback. We have a few cast members, the dramaturg and the director with us tonight. And I would like to welcome our special guests, Louis Douthit. She's the CEO and co-founder of Play on Shakespeare. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the structure of our Talkback. In just a moment, Louis will begin our conversation by introducing the Play on Shakespeare project and sharing with us the process of commissioning new translations of Shakespeare's plays. Then after each panelist will introduce themselves, Mia Strickland, who was a dramaturg for this production, will lead a brief guided discussion with the panelists about the production process. And following this, we'll open the discussion for questions from you. If you would like to submit a question, click on Q&A and type your question. Please remember that questions to the panelists should be submitted in the Q&A section. You can see the questions posted by others, and you have an option to upload the question if you would like to hear the answer. Please remember to keep all questions and comments respectful and on topic. This talkback has been recorded, and the link will be posted on the Theater UCF webpage shortly. And now I would like to welcome Louis Douthit. Louis, can you please tell us about the Play On project and your role in commissioning new translations of Shakespeare's work?
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you, Julia. But I want to take a couple minutes to just express my deep gratitude to everyone at UCF. Hi, Mark. It's lovely to meet you online. I thought you did a marvelous job, as did the whole cast. And Mia, I am looking at this cast chart play on the playbill. I'm just loving this chart. So I was like grateful to you for putting that together. I don't quite know how you got a hold of Play On translations, Julia. Might have been through Rita and John Lowndes when I came to Orlando in 2016, when they produced Ellen McLaughlin's Pericles. But I believe this is the first production of this translation. We've had, so I think you all have just done the world premiere, which is awesome and exciting, right? We've had some readings and stuff like that. And I think that this is one of the first productions I've had very little to do with, which is probably one of the many reasons why it was so successful. I get in the middle of things. It's always great. And I don't quite know how the 6 degrees of separation in our world is like 1.5. So I love to know how you heard about it. But let me just say, I'll just do this kind of briefly because I'm desperate to hear from the actors about the process and from Mark about how you put it together in your marvelous design team. I mean, I just think it was extraordinary tonight. And I'm just so very moved by all the efforts by UCF and by the support. So thank you everybody for being a part of this moment. In 2015, some of you may have gotten wind of this big press release that came out from the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. It said that we had commissioned 33 playwrights. So we're going to do 39 plays. And we're going to translate them into contemporary modern English. And it caused a little bit of excitement. And people were really kind of like, what are you doing? How could you you can't touch the language. Other people were saying, well, why don't you just adapt them? What are you doing? It's like, well, it's a really good question. What are we doing? So by then, however, we had done some tests. And this goes back to 2011 when we were first proposed. The idea was proposed by a man named David Hitz, who was a longtime patron and donor at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. He had read an article from the linguist John McWhorter, who said, isn't it time to translate Shakespeare? And John McWhorter was talking about how when Shakespeare is translated into other languages, it is translated into the contemporary language of the day. In other words, we're not translating it into 17th century French. And Dave wondered, has there been what's the difference between 400 years ago of English to today? And could we do an experiment on it? So this is like a massive, dramaturgically nerdy assignment, really. Well, we started out by testing a couple of them. So I approached a man named Kenneth Cavender, who translates Greek tragedy, because I figured someone who does something that serious, add a little weight to the project. And then I asked my colleague Doug Langworthy, who translated German plays, if he would take on a history play. And then I approached Ranjit Bolt, who I'd worked with on a production of his translation of Tartuffe at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, where I was at the time in 2011, if he would take on a comedy, and he chose Much Ado. So those three were kind of in like this pilot program. And it was a very funny process to work with Ranjit. I've still never met him. I'm dying to go over to England to finally meet him, but we did a lot of exchanges, and he's a very, very savvy translator. And I basically said, just do it as if it were, target language to source language to target language, sorry. And just tell me, I'm just going to watch and see how you come up with stuff. And there were moments where he would say in the margins, well, this is going to get cut in performance anyway, so why am I bothering to translate it? I said, no, I really want you to do the whole play. That is one thing I did learn. So I did ask the playwrights to do the whole play. So we had to go back about that. And that was very funny. He's never heard this either. So I'm hoping that he will hear this production in the next we have a couple weeks to see it, right? Right. So I'm hoping that he'll get to finally, he's never heard it in a workshop, which, as you all know, working on a new play or working on Shakespeare, you got to hear it out loud to hear if it works and just kind of see what the connections are orally. So that's kind of how it happened. There were these the three original, it was Timon of Athens, it was the three Henry Sixes and Much Ado. And Timon got produced at the Alabama Shakespeare Festival in 2014, and it was really, really good. And I was like, well, I don't know what this thing is, but it's really intriguing. And that's when I asked, could we do all 39 of them over a 3-year period? Just because I wanted a quick snapshot. I wanted a snapshot in a period of time of, what contemporary modern English might be. The verb translate is the thing that trips most people up. And most people think of word for word when they think of the word translate. And I'm not saying that there hasn't been some word for word. I was reading the Shakespeare as I was listening and watching you all. I don't know why I find that an interesting exercise. It's slightly schizophrenic, I suppose. But and I was like, ooh, he did do a lot of changing. Ooh. But really kind of up to them to choose where to have the intervention, whatever you want to call it. But I'm not that interested in just the literal word for word. I'm a dramaturg. I'm in the theater. We never could study Shakespeare in the theater department. Maybe that's not true at UCF, but it was always in the English department, and I just don't have that kind of brain. And I'm a real practical girl, and I want to know why it works on stage. Because if you read these things, you go, that thing can't possibly work. And then somebody, I'll do it. And you're like, oh, that's funny, right? So I wanted to have a sense of what it might feel like. And this is a platonic goal, really. What it might feel like between actors and audiences if everybody kind of speaks in a language that everybody kind of knows, which I think happened 400 years ago, right? They were speaking in a syntax that most people would know. Not saying that people walk around iambic pentameter and poetry, but people don't always walk around singing either. And I note that a lot of you are musical theater majors, which is awesome and goes hand in hand with Shakespeare. Burst into verse, the same thing as bursting into song, right? So that sort of elevated thing, yes, but the syntax of how we receive language is what I was kind of interested in. And that's the translation definition, which is the fourth definition of carry forward. I was interested in, can we carry forward that immediacy through language? That's the entire experiment. Some of it works, some of it doesn't work. Until you really kind of get in a room and kind of have you all kind of wrap your mouths around it and have Mark and Mia and designers kind of like grapple with it. It's kind of like a new play, but it's also kind of like an old play. It's very odd. And I guess I kind of like the oddness about it. So that's kind of what we were doing. That's what we've kind of done. They're all done, meaning they've all been through 2 drafts. We did a big festival last year where we read them all in chronological order just for the sheer hell of it, I guess. They're all about to be published, which is awesome. So you all are, you are first to get to this, and I just couldn't be more grateful that this happened and that you carried through and wanted to do something, you know, in the year of COVID. So I'm really grateful to all of you. So I hope that's a kind of good enough general intro.
Sure. Thank you, Louis, so much. And yes, it was Rita Lowndes who introduced us to this project.
Yeah.
And we're very grateful to Rita and John Lowndes for their sponsorship.
Yeah, totally.
And it was an amazing adventure. I came to Mark Brotherton, and asked him to look at this translation, knowing that Mark would be excited to embark on this journey. And so he was, and so we started the project. Unfortunately, we couldn't do a full production because of COVID. So we shifted to a virtual reading, but I'm glad we did that because I think it was a fascinating experience, and I would like to hear from you, from the actors, and Mark, of course, and Mia, who will lead this discussion about the process. So why don't you introduce yourself? Just say your name and the role you performed, and then Mia will take over.
I guess I'll start. I'm Mark Brotherton. I directed it, and I was in the Pericles at by the way, at
That's why I know your face. Yes, thank you. I was like, I know that face.
No, and then she saved me because there was one line, and that's why I love this. There was one. I learned 2 things that whole thing. It's just so funny. Jim Helsinger said the thing, and like someone in the audience had said, why update it? And he goes, well, you don't have to. You can always do the original. What I loved in Pericles was just one line. All of a sudden, I'm going, because I remember going, you know, there's this word fet. And I was looking up the, you know, F-E-T-E. I'm going, is the audience going to get that? Or should, and I know in England, it's said differently. It's like fate. And all of a sudden you said, well, why don't we just change it to feast? And I went, oh, great. And that was, I was like, that's what made it work so great. So I'm Mark, by the way. Okay, there we go. If people are introducing Julia, don't you think you should call out their names?
Yeah, just introduce yourself.
All right.
Haley, starting with Haley. Just say your name and the role you perform.
Hi, I'm Haley. I played Margaret.
Hi, I'm Sammy. I played Leonardo.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emily, and I played Don John.
Hi, I'm Andreas. I played Conrad.
Hi, I'm Paul. I played the first Watchman, Francis Seacole.
Hi, I'm Alexa. I played Hero.
Hi, I'm Sterling. I played Benedict.
Hi, I'm Lissy, and I was the understudy to Hero.
Hi, I'm Kent, and I was Antonio.
Hi, I'm Athena. I played Beatrice.
Hi, I'm Jonathan, and I played the messenger.
Okay, I think that's everyone, right? Mia, would you like to start? You have some really amazing questions that I think everyone will be excited to address.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Mia Strickland. I was the dramaturg for this production. Our first question is, how did this modern translation in verse inform your interpretation of the play?
I'll start, I guess. I just, I love these new translations. I haven't done one of the history ones, but I love for the comedies that instead of the characters just being funny or making funny characters, the jokes themselves are updated so we can laugh at the language also. And I think that's incredibly well done, because I'm not a scholar, but when I'm in a theater and all of a sudden you hear this one laugh, or you're watching a Shakespeare film and you hear this one laugh in the background going, ha, 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 and you're like, oh, come on. They're the only one that got the joke. I like this idea that it can be updated. What I do love about it also, though, is it's still in verse. And we all notice that in Act 4, when it gets heavier into verse, all of a sudden everyone, it just like, it moves faster, it does something different. And so I love the fact that the structure still keeps it in verse. So that was my experience, yeah.
I think the verse was really exciting too as an actor, because I know that was something I was interested before I had read the play. When I saw we were doing the translation, I was like, well, that's interesting, because Much Ado isn't obviously all in verse or majority verse, but there's a sizable amount, and then getting to sit in on it and be with that language. And I think I told you, Mark, the very first time I read it, when I got to Leonato's speech in the wedding, the why not speech, I was like, oh, that's the part I want, because the language is still so rich, despite it not being the literal Shakespeare, but a translation of it. And it's still so incredibly specific to character that it did kind of, like people have said, it's almost like a new play in some ways. It felt a lot like unlocking character through the language of a new play, just as much as an actual completely new text.
Yeah, I think that it offered a lot of opportunities to really play with, the different iterations from the classical to the new. Like there were a few different lines that when we were sort of going through them in the process, we weren't really sure how exactly they fit. Sometimes it was like these very haughty allusions to Greek myth and Jove and everything, and it was very interesting to see how that could actually be worked. Some of them were just like throwaway jokes, like a dry hand, and then we were just like, oh, okay, well, what does that mean in the context of this scene that we're working with? So I think that was a really fun opportunity to just kind of just play with a lot of the language that we were given.
I appreciate how like the modern translation makes it more accessible for different audiences. I mean, I think that we would all agree a lot of people love watching Shakespeare. That's why we do it so much. Everybody enjoys watching it. But doing this more modern translation makes it easier for everybody to understand it. And I know even as an acting major, I sometimes am sitting down to read a new Shakespeare play and I'm like, man, like, what is that? What exactly is he saying here? I struggle to understand it sometimes too. So getting to have this translation was just like a lot easier to understand, at that first read. And I think it makes it more accessible to everyone at different education levels and everything. So I appreciated that as well.
I think there's one thing I'm going to do from now on is when I'm teaching Shakespeare, because I might ask Julia to go, how do we get these copies of all these plays, is to have the actors. I'd love to have Beatrice and Sterling again to do a scene. Let's do it in the translation for 2 weeks, and now let's do it, or like that the chapel scene. Do it in translation, and then let's go back to Shakespeare. I think it'll help fill it. It'll clarify the actor much more. So I'm kind of excited about trying to do that in class. So.
Great. Well, if nobody has anything else to add, we're going to move on to the next question. What are the new possibilities and challenges that Shakespeare in contemporary translation offers to theater practitioners and audiences?
I think we already kind of circled around one of the benefits, which is just accessibility. I think a lot of people outside of the theater see Shakespeare kind of like the way that a lot of people see opera, which is that it's this thing for intellectuals, it's this thing for upper class people. You're not going to get it if you don't have a college education. Which isn't to say that if it's done well, opera and Shakespeare and the original text is completely for everyone. But I think it helps get rid of some of that stigma, some of the fear. And like Mark was saying, I think that's incredible if you're able to do that in classes from an actor standpoint, to have kind of a more contemporary step before you go to that language, because it can be really daunting. I was lucky that I started reading Shakespeare when I was a kid, but I mean, it can be really daunting to be thrown into something, because Shakespeare just has a different set of rules. It's like reading music. You have to attain the tools to understand, okay, this is how verse works. This is the rules within verse. This is why he shifts to verse here, blah, blah, blah. So having that kind of more contemporary first step as an audience and as an actor, as a director, as a dramaturg, as a designer is awesome.
I think one of the big obstacles is there's very clearly a cultural divide when you sort of analyze these classical Shakespearean works to more contemporary audiences. Like, you sort of go through this play and you start to realize that there are a lot of trappings and a lot of themes that would be viewed as like problematic to, you know, contemporary audiences. Like, you know, even though in our adaptation we thankfully have Emily in the role of Don John, there's still some lines that Don John delivers that are like kind of harsh, and it's a little bit difficult. So I think that even in terms of translating Shakespeare to more contemporary language, you still run into a lot of things where you're just like, oh, well, clearly Shakespeare was a wealthy white man.
Yeah, I think that the sort of ambiguous time period kind of allows us to look at the play with a 2020 lens and see what still rings true.
Well, it's interesting for me, just want to add a little bit from my perspective, because I first read Shakespeare in translation in a different language, because I was born in Russia. So my introduction to Shakespeare was in translation, and it felt, I remember how I experienced Shakespeare, it felt very contemporary and socially relevant at the time. And then when I came here and read Shakespeare in grad school, it was a different kind of Shakespeare. So I had several Shakespeares in my life. So I totally relate to all of you are saying, and what Louis said at the beginning about this sort of word translation that can be tricky, because it's not really translation from a language, another language. It's translation within a language, but it's a cultural translation too that we're dealing with in this particular case, which is challenging and exciting at the same time. Someone started saying something, and sorry I interrupted. So.
No, there was something though that Ken said. I like the updates because it also does help freeing up the casts, meaning it can be much more multicultural. It can also, I love male and female roles switching. It's easier to do it with the new translations because you sometimes feel like the original version of this. I was going to do it in Sicily in 1943 when El Duce came or was thrown down. And I was like, okay, but that's also already limiting me to how the cast has to go. Because I've always had a problem with Don John, and I was always like, oh, in this one, if we make it a woman, well, women are still treated like shit sometimes in the military. And I was like, well, frees it up a lot more. So I really, I think that helps that we can make it modern day, meaning it can also invite everybody to it. You know what I'm saying? So.
Great. Well, thank you all. Our next question is, what do you hope the audience takes from this production? And what did you take from this production and or from the experience of working on it?
I hope that what people can take from a production and take from just Shakespeare in general is that it is an approachable text. I realize that a lot of people are first introduced into Shakespeare in an academic setting, and it doesn't feel like it's something you can tackle. I know the first time I read Shakespeare, I was relatively young, and it's daunting looking at a text and being like, I have no idea what this means, and trying to uncover that. And with these modern translations, it can just show that Shakespeare's not so far away from the issues that we're facing now. And there's a reason this text has remained relevant. It's because these issues aren't so far away from the things that we're facing today. There's always going to be, it's just ingrained in humanity. And it's something I want an audience to realize, is that these stories are so important and remain to be told because we're so human, and we haven't resolved these petty issues. They keep coming up. And I hope people can learn that, looking at the text, that you're not so far away from these characters. Like, you have a witty banter with someone. That's something someone can have. It doesn't have to just be within this stuffy old text. And it's not stuffy if you really look into it. And that's just something I hope people can learn about it.
Something I'm hoping audience members can take away from this production, specifically, especially with the online format and the incredible amount of accessibility, is that an escape almost is what I'm hoping we could provide. Like, you know, we may be locked up inside, or the state of the world might be a bit wacky right now, but we can still entertain. There are still good stories to hear, and it's not that far away. I just hope that, you know, an escape can be offered, sort of, if that makes sense.
I agree with that. I think, oh no, keep going, Mark.
Oh, no, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say there's so much beauty in language and words and images, and I hope people can just be encouraged by it. I think we miss storytelling right now so much. I think it's so transformative. I know it is for me, just in the 2 weeks that we were able to work on it and then film it in a week. It's so healing for me. And so I hope that people can experience a bit of healing and see the power that we have with words and with language. There's so much power to tear people down, as we see with so many of the characters, but also to lift people up. Words are important. And so I hope they can leave with that.
And you just said the word story. It's such a great story. And I'm sorry, I've said all my life, I wanted to direct the chapel scene. Only because I love that Shakespeare knows both sides, that love can be fun, this and this, but can be hurtful and painful. And I love the fact that people call it a comedy. I'm always like, yeah, it is. But wait till you get to one scene, you go, it's your heart. It's touching. It's charming. It's a love story with all its ups and downs. So it's just a good love story.
Something I got from this experience that I hope our audience gets from it too is a sense of encouragement that theater will find a way. Like Paul was saying, we're feeling such a loss for live performance right now. And we performed Shakespeare online over Zoom, which was very challenging, but we did it. And so I hope that this gives the theater community a sense of hope that theater can adapt and change with the times.
I believe our brave leader, Mark Brotherton, put it well when he said, it's something never been done before.
Well, and we got away with a lot too. I mean, watching
I say that about every play. So.
That's true. That arbor scene with Benedict, I was saying in our group chat, watching it's like unbelievable to think that was filmed, everyone independently, and all of the comedy and the physical things we were able to put into it. Oh boy.
Something that I was kind of, I was just a little hesitant when I heard we were doing the translation at first, but it was such a big learning opportunity for me. I was so excited to, I was kind of nervous that we would lose the beautiful images that Shakespeare puts in his work, but the images are still there. The beauty in the language is still there. You just kind of have to uncover it a little more. But it was such a beautiful thing to go through.
I think also, kind of building off of what everyone's been saying, with like making it accessible to everyone, is that everyone can understand the emotion And Shakespeare is all about the words and everything, and kind of what Sammy was saying, that it's almost seen as this highbrow with opera and everything, but the emotion is still what we all feel, and the laughter too, and especially because we were kind of limited in the physical comedy being over Zoom, and so the comedy was in the words, and everyone can understand that, and Shakespeare can be fun. It doesn't have to be only for the hoity-toity.
Thank you. I love those answers. Our next question is, in what ways did you have to adjust your acting or directing process when performing virtually on Zoom?
I think Sammy brought up one going, okay, we have some very funny scenes here, which we always go, okay, so I've seen so many productions of it, that Dogberry, and I call it the Marx Brothers scene. They have to be specific, whatever. So how do you do that over Zoom? And then we were talking, and someone said, what about a cell phone? You're going to put a cell phone in. And I'm like, well, yeah, we can do that. We can do that right before with Ursula and Hero. But then I'm like, okay, we can do a script. Why don't Don Pedro wrote the scene for this. And I was like, why don't we try that? And it's just going, okay, but then I've got technical going, okay, hand to the right, hand to the left. I'm like, okay, that didn't work. Okay, I just hand 2 scripts out, and then the 2 guys just pick up scripts at your place. So there were little tricks, but it was actually, it was fun. Our biggest thing was, and I forget who came up with the beautiful way to do it, was going when Sterling and Athena have to kiss. I'm like, I don't want to do this over Zoom. And luckily, Don Pedro just interrupts. I was like, that works perfect, for this. So it was, and I love the fact that it wasn't me saying what to do. It was everyone coming up with ideas. How do we do it on Zoom, since I don't really know? And just going, okay, that'll work. Okay. And then when of course, Tim showed us what the set could do. I love the fact how it had Don John, Conrad, and Baraccio in one long line, even though it's 3 separate shots. It was so I have to thank the entire tech department and designers for pulling that together, because it also clarified the story for me so much better.
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting watching this, because it became even clearer to me, like, how many of us really are actors who are trained for stage and for theater. And you really start to notice how many of those kind of skills do or don't translate into screen acting, and film and acting for film. Like, for instance, one of my biggest hurdles was I really enjoyed, like, getting into the motion and everything, but because of this interface, I'm literally only using the webcam in my laptop, which doesn't have the best definition, as you can imagine. So much of my action just became blurry, as you can see now. And it was sort of trying to tackle that as best as we could. And I think that overall, like Mark was saying, it was just so much problem solving. And there were just so many creative minds from the cast, from the crew, that eventually we were able to make things actually work in very fun and interesting ways.
I think something interesting that I've been realizing over these past few months of Zoom life and quarantine life and online school is how unnatural it can feel to have to film your performances and your auditions. And, of course we have to do self-tapes and things like that. But for me personally, at least, having to perform the same thing in front of the camera over and over until it feels right, or, whatever the case may be, it's not the same as going up and performing in front of your class or your, or the audience or whatever. And so I just wanted to applaud the cast on, really making those connections and getting into the moment and having those natural, truthful acting moments with your scene partners over Zoom, because it is so hard to act in front of the camera and make those connections through a screen. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for sharing. So our last question before we move to audience Q&A is, this production concludes our fall season of virtual performances. How do you feel this show fits in with the rest of Theater UCF's fall season, and how did the other shows in the season impact the way you approached Much Ado?
I'll just say right away, the first thing when Julia said, "Can I do it?" I said, "Yes." Can I make it multicultural? Can I just make it that there are no boundaries? Because I was like, then we will fit in. And I especially was, especially going through the Me Too movement. I remember going to Julia, because she's, a theater scholar. I'm like, I will read books that there's a protagonist. I'm like, well, I think my show has two protagonists. It's both and antagonists, Beatrice and Benedict. I'm like, it's funny that you usually think of something. I said, so let's make sure that's that. It's a man and a woman, not just usually, you're going to say there's one protagonist and you add up the show. But this one, I was like, sorry, it's two. And I was like, I love learning that the rules are, because I am a stickler to old rules too. Protagonist, what's this, what's that, But this one I was like, and I have to be honest, I love my cast, but I was so lucky to get Athena and Sterling as my Beatrice and Benedict. I just love them. Okay, so that's, yeah. But empowerment, especially for women, and making Emily that too. I was like, let's do it.
I think it's really great that we can have a season where we focus on people of color and women of color, and choosing stories that are told by them, because they are so important and their voices need to be heard. But I think it's also really important to take something like Shakespeare, who is an old white man, and to give him the same diversity in his shows and to make those voices heard within his shows, because I think it is just as important that we tell all stories with all the people of our world, and that our voices are heard in every single story, not just their stories, which are just as important, but really incorporating them in everything. And theater should not be exclusive to anyone.
And like you guys have already kind of touched on, I mean, the stories are still happening. These things are still happening. All of the stories in Shakespeare, all of the things that we see happening in Othello, and now I'm blanking on every Shakespeare I've ever read. The political history plays, I mean, good God. That line that Beatrice has in the chapel scene where she says, "Oh, if I were a man," I mean, that just rings out. And Mark, you touched on this too, but something that I really loved about this, because I really like Much Ado, so I've seen kind of every production I could. Emily as Don John makes just a horrible amount of sense out of a very tricky character, because he's such a bizarre character. Why is he so furious all the time? Why is he like this? And Emily, I mean, and we've talked, I mean, offline too. So, I mean, I know a little bit about what you were kind of thinking in terms of interpreting the character, but just watching it, it's like, no, it makes a lot of sense when it's contextualized right, and when an actor can bring out that context. So yeah, I mean, universal and always relevant.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I think we are ready to start audience Q&A.
Great. Well, I would like to add just a little bit to what you all said about concluding our season, our virtual season, with this translation, modern translation of Much Ado About Nothing, because we had 4 incredible virtual readings before Much Ado as part of the series Amplify, Empower, Illuminate. And just to be honest with you, I struggled at the beginning when I was putting together, with everyone's help and input, the fall season, how to conclude our season, and whether that's actually a right choice to finish our full production with Much Ado About Nothing. And Mark touched on this a little bit. Mark and I talked a lot about it, saying, well, we're not we're not presenting a traditional Shakespeare, right? It's, Mark said that he would be working with a multiracial cast, and it's a new translation by Ranjit Bol, who is a British playwright of Indian descent. So there's diversity there as well, and I think that it really worked. I hope it worked. I hope the audience felt that that this season had sort of a trajectory in a way. And that trajectory made sense to everyone. So I want to thank you for your creativity. Okay, so we have right now we only have one question, and that question is connected in a way to some of what you said before. So I'm going to read the entire question. It's a little long. It's from Kitten Markey. This new era of online theater has obviously presented a lot of challenges, but has also provided a way to experiment with many different styles and creative liberties. What were some things you enjoyed during this experience that maybe would have been more difficult had it been in person?
So I'll say this, I actually joined Theater UCF in the spring of 2012 and was, a whole bunch of stuff happened, ended up having to stop take classes, and then finally came back. And by this point, I had moved all over the country. Now I'm living in Tallahassee. And so there was kind of this, deep anxiety I was having, because I was like, oh no, I still have, these participation credits left in order to finish this degree. And then, like, miraculously, I find out that this season is all being done virtual. And so I was just like, oh, that's a really interesting opportunity. So I ended up, working more than I ever have for an audition, and was able to get called back, and, finally Antonio. And so for me, one of the biggest challenges is that logistically, I would not have been able to be in this production had events played out otherwise, and the production had been live. And that being said, I am so thankful for this opportunity. This is my first Theater UCF production, and it has just been such a rich experience to be able to work alongside such a brilliant cast, such fun direction, like really just incredible opportunity. I'm very grateful.
I think one thing it made us really do, and there's someone we have to thank, is also Vivian, who did the text work and a whole bunch of stuff, because on stage, movement helps everything with our eyes and this, and you can get the feeling, there's tension just where how you block it. But on this, we lose a lot of tension unless it's created in the language, or unless the comedy is also created in the language. So I have to thank her so much, because a lot of it was going, my gosh, now that I think about it, we should all be doing this in every show we're doing. Look at the text a lot more, because most of the answers are right there. So it's just so funny going, it took Zoom to go, okay, let's really, really study it. How do we get this one thought across when we only have words, as opposed to blocking, which, you have someone back to back and all that stuff. I was like, this is kind of fascinating. And also, again, like the arbor scene, I was like, it was everyone coming up with an idea. I was like, what do we did a script? Because I'm like, how do we do this? Because, you can block that it's funny. But I was like, we got to come up with something else that the audience gets what we're doing, but whatever. And so, but it was Sammy who came up with the thing that when he heard something between the sheets, that he got pissed and started ripping up the script. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a great idea. So it was just, I think you have to just be open to go and explain to the cast, like I hope I did. I'm not really sure how we're going to get this across. We're going to need everyone's input and go, how do we get this across to the audience? Because we all can see it in our minds how we do it on stage, but to do it where we're just stuck here, I was like, but that's why you always just thank your cast. I mean, it's their show now. Well, it is. It's always their show, but it was just interesting going, there are problems, but it is that line. every real problem has a real solution. And I thought the cast did some beautiful saluting or some finding solutions.
I really don't think we can praise Vivian enough. I mean, just to circle back to that, it was one of the things that, and I mean, I'm sure we would have had this in person too. So this is kind of cheating because I don't know that it answers the question very well. But to get those opportunities that some of us had where we would just have rehearsal time scheduled, where it was like, okay, you block this for the next half hour, you're with Vivian. I know we got to look at that speech in the wedding scene, and just we worked on it for I think like 25 minutes, and it was just like a master class in acting, but specifically in like working with this heightened text, and then the opportunity for that heightened text to be in a contemporary verse translation, which that alone, just the fact having a contemporary verse piece is kind of it's pretty rare as it is. So that was just really wonderful. If she's watching, I hope she's watching. Thank you.
There's one more question from Issa Jones. Are there any actors who would like to speak on their character developing process and how it may have changed in this new medium?
But before that, I also have to think, since it's Issa is my assistant director, and I always want to say, I love having my assistant directors direct. So two or more of the scenes were done by her. So of course, clap to you. Okay.
Thank you, Issa.
That's also a great question.
In terms of said question, the process of it is, as it was previously mentioned, the process and techniques of some of it didn't exactly translate over because of just how different this medium is to Theater UCF. So what I'd like to think it had everybody do is, while we are physically inside the Zoom box, we had to think outside of the box for a lot of what we were going to do. Like, for example, the watch characters with me, Will, Reese, and Jameson, typically they are all very physically comedic characters. But with us being, in this medium, we can't exactly bumble around and be 100% Marx Brothers, as Mark put it. So that caused us to think of other ways we could deliver that sort of humor, whether it be like, subtly fidgeting with our sunglasses or putting them on the wrong way, or like very distinct facial expressions at moments and things like that. Not to mention thinking outside of the box, the amazing tech work that was done for this show, for what we did, the editing and the transitionings and the music, it was all fantastic and just something that you don't really see if you would go to see a live performance, obviously because it's live, but regardless, I like to think that the development had us think outside of the box in ways that we never really would have to if we were doing it live.
I think something I found especially challenging with this online format is that a huge factor of this play is relationships. And so it was very difficult to feel your relationship with your scene partner when you're not in the same physical space. And so I had to do, I did a lot of work on my own of finding out who Margaret was. I looked at, I found her birthday and I made her a star sign, and having all of these ideas of so I could have a very strong idea of who she was, so that I would be even stronger going into a scene with a scene partner where I wouldn't be able to have that in-person volley back and forth with them.
I think one thing that live theater does have, that sometimes I think actors had to work harder in this, is that we forget about all those conversations when we're in the theater, when all of a sudden the scene ends and you just walk off with your scene partner going, okay, let's, tomorrow night I'm going to try something different, blah, blah. And so you start developing all that stuff because you're also talking for 4 hours a night if you're not on stage. And I kept going, I was kind of terrified to do this. Well, no, I was. But part of it was because I always think that's where great ideas come. It's not from the director. It's what the actors do when they walk off stage and go, that didn't really work. I'm going to try this. And then they bring in the next day and you're like, what did you do? Well, we thought about it. And fortunately in this, you have to think on your own. And so proves it tests you a lot. And I thought, again, the actors proved the test.
And I think also with that, because we didn't have that chance to like talk with our castmates as much, like right after the scene and build those connections as actors before characters, it also really forced you to listen. And, they always say acting is reacting. And I think we were really challenged to like, especially because it is so easy to get distracted in front of a screen when you're in your room alone. You really have to challenge yourself to be in the scene and to really listen and to react to what's happening. So I think that was, it really forced you to rethink that.
It's very odd to know that as performing in a play, you kind of feel a constant feeling of urgency. It's very weird to sit down and feel that urgency and keep sitting. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think my portrayal of Don John at least would be very different, because so much of that character development is getting the character on their feet too, and I don't know, I can't really imagine reading for this part and not feeling explosive almost at specific parts of it. So it was really interesting in that way. I think we all got very buddy with the language itself and the text, which I think is going to help us all out as actors a lot down the line. So
yeah, I think one of the challenges with developing character was that really, like, when you're in a stage production, you of course you get your costumes, the set's built, and then finally you walk out on stage for rehearsal one night, and you just get this overwhelming sense of, oh, this is where I am, oh, look, an enchanted forest and I can touch this fake tree. But with this, all that we had were, we eventually got the costumes and we had a green screen. And so much of it became this theater of the mind exercise where really between you and your scene partners, you had to figure out and establish where you actually were. I remember that there was this one night during rehearsal where Mark was kind of like really trying to, get us into the idea of like, we're outside, we're in an orchard. And he was just like, yeah, you all know, Uta Hagen's 9 questions and everything. And I was kind of just like, oh yeah. And there was just this moment where we had to return back to those basics to really develop it, because we couldn't rely on the set or the closeness to another actor in order to really bring us into that moment. So I thought that was really fun. And I think that a lot of us really rose to that challenge.
Okay, I guess we are at time. It's 10:23. And I would like to thank all of you for the production and extend my gratitude to the wonderful design team who made it happen for us, and all of them worked very hard. I would like to thank Louie for her feedback and very valuable advice when it came to making cuts. And we were not sure what to do, whether that would be okay. Mark was anxious about it, and Louis provided wonderful advice.
Well,
Thank you so much.
That was one thing, yes, and it was going, only because that's the one problem with Zoom is people sitting for more than 2 hours. I was like, we got to get it at least to go maybe 2 hours, 2:10 to go. And so I was like, Julia, I'm so terrified of that because I don't want to, it's translation, I don't want to cut anything, but there's things that I have to go that I can't do visually, so I thank you both for that a lot. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Louis.
You did a great job, Mark, really. It was a lovely, lovely cutting.
Thank you. And again, I would like to thank Rita and John Lowndes for Rita for introducing us to this wonderful project, and both Rita and John for sponsoring it. So we're concluding our fall season with the show, and we're planning exciting live shows in outdoor venues in the spring. So we'd like to see all of you there, and stay tuned for more information. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.